Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the SOMM TV podcast. Great to have you here. On today's pod, I am going to talk about the real context of starting your own vineyard. And I don't mean, with a company, with a bunch of investors, with a huge amount of labor. I'm talking about two people who had a dream to start a vineyard, who I know very, very well. And it's a lot of work. This is kind of the hopefully the real story of what it's like to do what many of us think we want to do. And I'm going to get into it with them and find out if it was a good decision. Before I do that, I want to say several of you are waiting on several films that we have coming up. We have 3 feature films: The Ghost of Spring Mountain, The Judgment of Paris, The Cup of Salvation, which is the 4th SOMM film, and many other things. Those are on their way. And we have ancillary content starting to come on SOMM TV for each one of those pretty soon. Right now, we are releasing episodes of Drink a Bottle that are around the Judgment of Paris, where we open up vintages from or associated with that event. And you shouldn't miss any of these. In a lot of cases, these are like some of the last bottles in the world, and they're opened by people who were either there or very important in playing a role in the event or for that bottle. This week, we have an episode of Drink a Bottle opening the 1971 Mayacamas from Braden Albrecht, who is the current winemaker at Mayacamas. And it's just, it's great stuff. It is a really rare bottle of wine from an incredibly storied vineyard that is very important in that event. Tune into SOMM TV for that. And if you're not a subscriber, $49.99 for an entire year. Without further ado, the couple that I have on today's pod is, full disclosure, John Adams runs all of the sound. And if you've ever watched anything we've made on SOMM TV or watched any of the SOMM films, it's been him that's done the sound design and likely done the sound on set as well. Him and his wife, Megan, started a vineyard in Oregon from scratch, and for many, many, many years, John and her talked to me about how much they wanted to do this, and there was always this element of how the hell are you going to pull it off? Well, I'm sitting with them right now in Oregon at their house, overlooking 5 acres of vines that seemed like an impossible dream, and they've done it. How are you guys doing?
Good, Jason. How are you doing?
I'm not buzzed enough because you have not given me enough champagne, if you want me to be honest.
We'll work on that.
Okay, good. John, how you doing, bud?
I'm good, man. It's nice to have the SOMM TV podcast in the Willamette Valley.
Yeah, it's been a long running gag that SOMM TV does not acknowledge Oregon enough, and I would like to apologize to you listeners who love Oregon wine. We're coming in a big way, but we're here. I'm here in person. COVID has sort of wreaked havoc on in-person interviews and all of that for a long time. So I'm in person. John, who's across from me, you and I have shot together in many, many countries in Europe and South America. We've shot all over the United States for greater part of a decade for all of the SOMM projects.
Yes.
And this is a very unique take for us to be talking about your vineyard, which is next year going to have its first vintage.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Usually I'm the guy behind the scenes, not talking. Today, I'm talking.
Yeah, right. Well, we'll see how. Yeah,
we'll see how this goes.
Yeah, we'll see how you like it. So, Megan and John, I want to start with something that's I think anybody listening has thought at one point. Man, wouldn't it be great to have a vineyard? You're sitting there, you're at a tasting room, or you're out amongst the vines, and you think this would be a wonderful experience. So I have to ask you two, why the hell, besides the obvious thing that we've all thought a little buzzed, why would you have a vineyard? Why did you guys want to uproot your life, move to a different part of the country, and start a vineyard? What was the reason?
I think that it was a really long process. It's not something you just decide overnight. I think that for Meg and myself, our journey and our sort of obsession with wine and food, and it happened when we met each other. We met each other 12 years ago, and at the time when we met, neither one of us was really, were either of us into wine?
No, I mean, I think we drank wine. I think you enjoyed it, but in terms of per se like knowing wine, no, I think it was a party drink.
Yeah, totally. I didn't even like
bar
wine. I was a total beer guy. Zero interest in wine whatsoever. We go visit wineries, and I was like, why would people pay money for wine when you could just drink beer? Why? But at the time, she started to work for a big wine retailer in L.A., and that was about the same time that I met.
You can call it out. A lot of listeners know Wally's Wine.
Yeah, Wally's Wine and Spirits.
It's a very big company.
Meg started working there, and that was right about the time when I met you, Jason. You were working on the original SOMM film at the time.
I had a crew of 50, 60 people. We were
50, 60 guys.
Huge budget, several $1 million, yep.
For sure. And I started slowly kind of opening my eyes to the world of wine and becoming more and more interested. And I was always kind of interested in agriculture because I grew up on my grandpa's Christmas tree farm over in eastern Ohio. And I remember there was a bottle of, Meg would bring these bottles home from work that were already open, like sample bottles.
Yeah, that was one of the perks of working at Wally's. You could you got to try anything you heard of. You could bring it home.
So you stole a lot of wine from work.
God,
That's
no.
good. I like that. Okay, keep going.
But I remember it was a 2008 Ridge Cabernet.
Yeah.
That was the bottle that kind of changed our mind on what we thought wine could be,
Yeah.
And, ever since then, that was kind of the bottle that opened our eyes. Over the course of the last decade, we've been very fortunate in that we got to make these films about food and wine. And in the process, we got to meet amazing farmers, winemakers, producers from all over the world. And that was a tremendous learning experience on so many levels.
Yeah, but how do you go from enjoying a glass of wine to actually wanting to make it is, I think, a question unto itself. And that is, do you enjoy being in your space around you? Do you enjoy being outside? Mm-hmm. Do you enjoy your surroundings? Do you want to get in the mud and make your dream happen? Because anyone can enjoy wine from the periphery. Anyone can go, I love wine, I want to go wine tasting. And that's great. And I highly advise that. But there's something to be said for us. I think it came from discovering wine in a more in-depth way to then kind of realizing that as kids, we're both from the Midwest. We both liked being outside and doing something with your hands, and really making a dream happen from the ground up.
I have to jump in and say that there is this, I've interviewed, there's got to be, it's got to be in the hundreds and hundreds of winemakers, some being some of the more prominent people that have ever made wine, and I've been very fortunate to do that. What you're saying, a lot of people say. Yeah. Now, I have seen you two covered in mud from your eyebrows to your knees, and it's such a walk the walk thing that we're talking about, that I'm not talking about a wealthy person who hires people to farm a vineyard or hires people to make their wine or does anything. And there's nothing wrong with that. But there is a difference between that and this. And what you guys have done is, it's not like, how many investors do you guys have for your wine?
Zero. It's us.
But your parents are incredibly wealthy. So that was a really good.
No.
Yeah, make no mistake, we're not wealthy people here.
Yeah.
We have worked very hard and saved what money we've been able to save to put this whole dream together.
We know how to roll up our sleeves.
The reason we're having this conversation is because I want to get into the nitty-gritty of what actually it entailed once you sat down and said, I'm going to make this stuff. It's not a fluke. It's not because you've worked on the films that you're on this pod. It's because you are a very meticulous person. We should say the name of your wine, Wildsound Wine.
Wildsound Wine,
mm-hmm.
yeah.
And these are people that you'll want to look out for. They're in a great spot. Their wine's going to be fantastic. You can't buy it right now because their first vintage will be next year. So
doesn't exist.
It's really just file that away somehow. But
it'll get there.
All right. So when you found the spot, you've got a place. I will ask you, why Oregon? You were living in LA. Why come to Oregon? Why not Santa Barbara? Why not the Finger Lakes? Why this place?
I think so. I started coming up to Portland. I had a cousin who went to grad school in Portland. And I would just come up to visit her when I was living in LA. And this was about the same time when Meg and I started getting interested in wine, like a decade ago. And, the more time that we spent here in the Willamette Valley, the more we sort of fell in love with it. Not only does it have this amazing climate for growing all kinds of things, including wine grapes, but this place is absolutely beautiful. We are 45 minutes from the ocean. We have mountains. We have rainforests. We have all these amazing, beautiful geographic features that make this place really special. And then there's the people. We really felt like, we found the town of McMinnville to be just perfect for us. People are very friendly. There's a sense of community here among the wine growers, and we just felt like this was the place for us to be. Also, we have water here.
Yeah.
And
seasons.
Kind of a sad sentence that you have water here. Yeah.
It was just kind of a no-brainer once I got up here. Because honestly, John had said, Meg, I think Oregon might be it. And I was like, no, I don't. It's going to be here, or we're going to go back to Chicago or something. And I got up here. He showed me McMinnville. He's like, I think you need to see this town. And I saw the town, and I was kind of like, oh, shit. You're right. The dream is attainable. We felt like this was the first piece of the puzzle that kind of fell into place for making a vineyard happen.
We should say you guys have 5 acres.
We have 5,
And several different types of grapes planted in those
5 acres is plenty.
Plenty.
Yeah, you guys do it all yourselves. And so let's talk about, you have this plot of land. What is the first thing you did? And I want to reiterate, when you go to Napa and you go wine tasting and you see a place that is a team of hundreds of people in a lot of cases. I'm not talking about, the Carol Merediths or the back when Steve and Jill Mathiasen who've been on the podcast. And I'm not talking about that, but I am talking about on the whole, a lot of the wineries you think of that you go tasting at, they're not this type of thing, which I'm assuming you guys will turn into a super target at some point. And you'll be enormous, huge, big
Watch
tasting
out.
room,
Jams. Yeah. John and Meg's.
Yes, jams. Yeah, I like that. So what are the first things that has to happen? And I know this was very tough, John. I have spent a lot of time on the phone with you, and you were crying quite a bit, and there was a lot of tears. And I know that you have some very sore arms and legs from the process of the last few years.
When you look at one of the things when you're looking at planting a vineyard, right? It's like something that you're gonna be doing this for the rest of your life, presumably, and you really want to get it right the first time and not mess it up, because we might not have another chance to plant a vineyard. We finally found this beautiful place out west of McMinnville in the Coast Range. Great elevation, this perfect, beautiful southeast facing slope. We've got volcanic soils. It's an amazing place to put grapes in the ground. But one of the first things we had to decide was if we were going to amend our soil at all. So once we amended the soils, then you have to get the vineyard surveyed. So we'd hire a surveyor to come out. They survey the grid that will be where the vines are planted and the whole trellis system goes in.
Yeah, you're not just going and sticking the vines in the ground and,
just line them up and stick them in the ground. It's like, it's a very exact thing because you got to live with this thing your whole life, If you mess it up at that stage, you're always going to have crooked rows and you're always going to have tractor disaster trying to get through there. But the most important thing after you've prepped the soil, after you've put up your deer fence, after you've thought about trellis, spacing, is what are you going to put in the ground?
Mm-hmm. I love my husband here very much. He is a very analytical research brain. So it's hours and hours of looking at what do you want to put in the ground. And I am blessed every day to have him because I'm very happy with what we put in the ground. But it's not something you take lightly. As John said, this is something we're going to be doing for the rest of our lives.
I mean, you guys, that's like 10 years. You're going to be okay. At the rate of how difficult this is. Okay. All right.
So it was a lot of picking grapes first, right? We had to decide what clones, decide what varieties we wanted to put down there.
Yeah, what are you going to plant? I think one of the interesting things about what we decided to plant here, so Oregon doesn't need more Pinot Noir. The Willamette Valley has thousands of acres of Pinot Noir planted, and
I know several winemakers who would disagree with you, but they are not thinking about it the same way you are. Okay.
Yeah. So we sort of took the approach like, what do? We need to move sort of beyond Pinot Noir. What other things could we plant here that might not be,
But also, what do we like to drink?
Yeah,
right? It really became, at the end of the day, we have to drink this stuff if it doesn't sell. So it's up to us.
But we're also small enough that we can
It's a lot of cases.
I know.
Our production is small enough that we can take chances and make the wines that we want to drink.
Oh, I can't wait for the follow-up podcast where we say, how the hell are you guys going to sell? I'm not concerned you're going to be able to sell them because I think, it's not a huge amount, but also you guys are smart and you think ahead and you plan. So,
So what did we plant? We planted Gamay, we planted Chardonnay, planted Trousseau Noir. We have a little Schioppettino going in the ground. And we also have some Pinot Noir.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
We didn't forget about
hey, I like drinking Pinot Noir, so I knew that was going to go in
That's
there.
amazing. That's like a band that's like, we'll never ever license our music except to Ford commercials.
Yeah.
I like that. Okay. Sell out.
Yeah.
But
no, I'm just kidding. Pinot Noir makes sense. Pinot Noir grows great here. It really does.
Of course.
Ultimately, it is also a grape that sells. We are a business, right? We plan to make all the wine, but if we should ever need to and to sell grapes, from a business standpoint, it makes sense.
But the cool thing is, so the stuff that we did plant, we have a very small vineyard by vineyard standards. So the stuff that we did plant, we planted a lot of different selections of that particular grape, right? So if we plant Chardonnay, we have an acre of Chardonnay, which is minuscule. But in that 1 acre of Chardonnay, we have 14 different clones of Chardonnay. Mm-hmm. Some people might think that's crazy, Some people think that, you're going to have a hell of a time getting everything to ripen at the same time. You'll have some stuff that's under, some stuff that's over. But I think that in the end, it'll all come out in the wash. You'll have some stuff higher acid, some stuff a little riper. And I think that ultimately that makes for a more complex, delicious wine. And hopefully it works out.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's why this spot is so fascinating because you two, and now make no mistake, you can do tremendous things with five acres. I mean, I would assume, the reference I will make is Carol and Steve Lager, Carol Meredith, who's in all of the SOMM movies. She's in the next one coming up. And her brilliant husband, which have a Verticals episode, the premiere episode of the first season, they have that many acres. And they do tremendous work up there in Napa. And they do mostly everything themselves. And I think that some of the great, I don't love the word new world, but some of the great new world winemakers start with this type of a size of a thing if they're not part of a large investment or a larger thing. And so, make no mistake, listener, it is one of these things where you can do this with this amount of acres.
Hey, listen, and from a farming standpoint, 5 acres is plenty.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I mean, every year I will say we start before kind of the whole season starts and we go, maybe we should put in a few more rows or maybe we should put in some of this. I guarantee you by the time we get to harvest, we're like, nope, not happening, not putting in any more vines.
Yeah.
We're good. We're great.
I find the winery situation, having traveled all over, you find my favorite is to work with people like you. I'm praying to God I work with you, John, forever on sound, on my films I direct, but also, to work with husband and wife teams, family teams, people who are all in. And there's a clear thing you guys have no backup plan and have to do. You have to be all in, you got to plan, you have to adapt, what comes out of that type of a relationship is a wine that is generally feels the same way. No backup plan. They did what they wanted to. You adapted, you pivoted. And that's why it's kind of important to have this conversation before your first vintage. Because I haven't been able to do that with anybody because you don't know what's going to happen. And by the time you hear about a vineyard so small but yet successful, they're already successful. So you don't get a chance to, you're telling their story in retrospect. So this story is happening as I talk to you. So when you chose Gamay, you chose Pinot, you chose Chardonnay, all, Trousseau, Noir, and all of these are very smart decisions. What had to happen? What's the first step? What did you do?
The first thing we did in the ground?
What did you do? I mean,
we did an 8-foot deer fence, a mile long, a mile plus long 8-foot deer fence that we had to put up. That's what we did.
Okay. So this is a incredibly, this might sound boring, a deer fence, but John, I spent a lot of time talking to you about how hard this was. You put up a mile-long deer fence.
Yes.
You have
almost
15, 16 employees.
Yes. Yeah. People need to understand that very few people farm their own vineyards and make their own wines. There's typically that's a function of just scale. I mean, if you have 15 or 20 acres of vines in the ground, you can't physically farm that with 1 or 2 people. You need a team, you need help to do that. So we end up doing all this stuff ourselves, and one of the things you don't really think about is we had to put up this stupid deer fence. And putting up...
Our relationship is stronger because of it.
Yes, I'm sure it's wonders for the sex life, the deer fence. Yeah, keep going, I'm sure.
But this deer fence is terrible. It involves just putting up, we actually went with, most people would do a metal deer fence, but our vineyard is surrounded by forest, and the damn trees and the limbs in the winter and the windstorms, they just fall on the fence.
Best decision we made was that poly fence.
Yeah, so we ended up doing, instead of a metal fence, we did something called a poly fence, which is almost like a heavy duty mesh, but it keeps the deer and the elk out of the vineyard. Never had any issues. And when the trees fall on it in the winter, it's easily fixed.
But let's keep in mind, so our vineyard goes from 600 to 800 feet, meaning it's not a flat land. We likened it to CrossFit. It was like our own personal CrossFit section of like getting a fence down a hill and back up it. Only this one, we were in complete mud gear. It was pouring rain.
This is in December.
The day we put it up, because in December, and your fingers are just frozen. No, yeah. Oh, especially in Oregon.
It's like
here.
37 degrees and drizzling, and we're out there for weeks, standing on a ladder, muddy.
I got to hold the fence.
Pounding posts and putting up deer fence. But it worked in the end.
So great. Step 1, deer fence.
Yeah.
Okay. So now how many vines did you do you have planted, and how many vines did you plant? Is it the same?
We have a little over 6,000 vines now in our about 5 acres of vines. It's hard because you buy all these different selections of grapevines, all these different clones, and they have to come from different nurseries because not all nurseries have the plant material that you're looking for. And you have to order these things a year plus in advance.
So they can come on trucks at a certain time, because if you order too late, you can't get the ones you want.
It's a logistical nightmare for sure.
Okay, so you've gotten your vines reserved. You waited a year and a half or a year to get them. Okay, you get them. What do you do next?
So at this point, the vines have shown up in the spring of 2019, and now we have to get these things in the ground. 6,000 of anything is a lot of anything. So, yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I was going to try to think of something, but nope, you're right.
You don't realize how many 6,000 is until you see 6,000 of them sitting in your
and you realize
all
of those have to go
They
somewhere.
have to go in the ground. So at this point, you need help. So we hired a small crew from our friend Jessica Cortell, who was nice enough to answer the phone when we wanted to plant a small vineyard. So we had a crew come out and help us for a few days. We couldn't really afford more than that to help us plant the vines. So let's
keep in mind that those 2 days, so it happened, this was March of 2019, and March in the Willamette Valley can be any range of season. It started off and it was rainy and cold and gross. I mean, these guys were amazing, and they came out and we were right there with them trying to get as much as we could in the ground with a team of more than us. So it's 2 guys with an auger. Yeah.
I call it a torture machine. It's a stupid thing.
It's awful.
It's got an auger.
Rips your shoulders off.
And you dig the holes.
So what's an auger? So basically it's
a gas powered, it's a gas powered
drill.
It's like a chainsaw motor, but there's a 8-inch drill bit, 8-inch wide
basically like
drill
a hand
bit.
drill.
A giant hand drill.
A giant drill that goes in the ground, and you auger out every hole, all 6,000 of them.
Torture machine.
And you plant the vines.
Does it like shake your whole body or something like that?
Yeah, it rips your arms off. It's
and
awful.
if you hit a rock, which we have lots of rocks in that vineyard, it could yank your shoulder out of place.
You have 6,000 of those, and this crew did a number of them, right? But you had to do 40% of the rest of the vineyard?
Yeah, we had to finish it up. So the amazing thing is we had friends come into town, and everybody helped us to plant the rest of the vineyard.
It was crazy. The day, we had just gone through that, right? And the crew left the second day, and we knew what we had ahead. Pouring rain. And John and I were determined to get the Trousseau Noir in the ground. And I will say, I don't know if I've ever been muddier than that March day, just head to toe, under your fingernails. We did see a tree frog, so that was fun.
I do like tree frogs.
You also need to understand that the entire time this is happening, you're questioning your sanity.
Yes.
And why did we do this? What is happening? Because once you start the train rolling down the tracks, there's no turning back.
Yeah.
You have to go ahead and get this stuff in the ground because you have made this investment that you have to, this is it, man. You got to just do it.
You guys listening, you have to understand, John is one of my best friends who I'm talking to right now. And I know this is like a podcast where I'm trying to be formal here and trying to but I had conversations with this guy on the phone where we talked about Apocalypse Now and heading down the river to kill Colonel Kurtz, and that John was going insane during the process of making this vineyard. And I would call John and I would ask him, we'd be mixing something. There'd be some piece of content due, or, I say content loosely, but, some film we're mixing, whatever. And I would ask him how it's going, and he'd be like, it's totally fine. The mixing is fine, but I'm thinking about going outside in the middle of the night and setting fire to everything that I've done so far in the vineyard.
I mean, I have to say, there's probably at least 3 times every year that we go, do we just mow it down? Should we just mow it down? Is it just going to be easier?
Do we walk away?
Do we walk away? Just mow it down and walk away. But we don't, because we love it. Those are one of those... In the Trousseau Noir, in the mud, covered head to toe, you walk back up to the house. And that's kind of what John said. You don't get the decision of let's take a day off tomorrow. Let's just relax.
And you guys are all also working full-time jobs. Mm-hmm. I know, because John, you work with me full-time, beyond full-time.
Yeah,
and Meg, you work
full-time
at Wally's.
Yeah.
And so, or, remotely from Oregon at Wally's, though.
Yeah.
But which one is more full-time? Your 50-hour-a-week job, or your... How many hours do you put on the vineyard at this time, especially this time?
Well, it just depends on the time of year, There's always something, but it's certain times of the year it's really intense, when, after bud break, things grow really fast and you have to go and shoot thin everything, because if you don't, things get out of control real quick. And you have to understand, like, these shoots are growing. These things grow like an inch a day, right? So if you get a week behind on shoot thinning in May, it's a mess, you know? There are things that have to happen in a timely manner. There are times when you just cannot keep up with.
There's not enough hours in the day.
There's not enough hours in the day.
Yeah. And especially, I mean, during that time, when we did plant the vineyard, the final kind of 2 days, we had a group of friends that were like, well, come up and we'll help. And you never know how that's going to work, right? It sounds really fun to work on a vineyard until you're 2 hours in and you're like, okay, cool, this is great. Thanks. I'm out.
Yeah.
And I get it. I mean, we say that to everyone. We're always like, you tell us when, because we won't stop. We understand this is not your burden to take on. We had this great group of friends that came and helped us finish planting this vineyard. And for some reason, the sun decided to bless us with her presence that day. And we were in short sleeves, and it had this great camaraderie. And I always talk about, because I think these moments are so important to establish what you're doing is right. We put the last vine in the ground, and we have these wonderful friends who make the most incredible paella. And they were going to do that for everyone that planted for us. We put this last vine in the ground, and all we remember doing is like this sense of it's completed. And then this food smell wafting down the hill from the house. Your senses are just overwhelmed.
We were overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed. But in this beautiful, magical way of we're doing the right thing. You know, you had this moment of completion here. No idea that the work ahead is going to be even twice as hard, because that was hard enough. But it was that moment of like, okay, we did the right thing.
You know what you're describing to me? Like an abused spouse. You know, like somebody who's been abused and they are saying, but they said sorry. No, I mean that in the way that like anybody who, look, there are varying degrees of what's difficult for a person or for a group of people or whatever. And so I would never try to like say like, you got to make a vineyard to prove yourself. But I would say, you know, when you have a child or you make a film or you do something and it's so horribly difficult and then it happens and somehow there's something in your brain, it's like the human instinct, like you forget, or at least your brain tells you it was worth it. And I think in the case of what you guys are doing, you're too exhausted to deal with the pain you just dealt with, and so you turn to the other way. It does seem like it's like this natural defense mechanism to say like, all right, that's how I deal with what I just went through. We're done. It's amazing.
Well, I more think of it, I think, Jason, as honestly like a universe thing versus this is how my brain copes with it. I think that the universe every now and then tells you like, all right, here's a little break for your brain.
I like it.
And that was a little piece of the Willamette Valley being like, all right, we have a lot of trials and tribulations ahead, but here's one little break for your brain.
Well, there's one. We didn't even speak about the fact that you have to hammer in. So every vine gets
I'll leave
a
that
post,
to John.
right? Every vine gets a post. Is that correct?
Not every vine.
Okay.
But
I want to talk because this is something that I remember talking to you about, and I think you know, when you go wine tasting, you're wearing a nice button-down shirt and. You know, you're with people you love and it's a lot of fun. You don't think about these damn posts that are sitting in the vineyard throughout. And I know this is very hard for you.
It was very hard. You have to make a decision when you plant a vineyard what kind of end posts you're going to put in. And we agonized over, do we put in wooden end posts or do we put in steel end posts? So we chose to go with steel end posts. And steel, of course, is more expensive. And it was especially expensive at the time because of the bullshit Trump tariffs that had just gone into effect. So we ended up paying like 20%.
I love that the wine world got effed 10 ways from Sunday, but nobody thought about it in a standpoint of like steel matters for making wine.
Yeah.
You don't think about this. So we have 90 rows, so that's 180 end posts. And instead of just hiring a crew to pound in these stupid steel end posts.
And you did this, why? Because you had the money and didn't want to spend it? Or
No, we ended up going with the steel end post because it would allow us, should we pursue someday, to get organically certified. We farm organically, but we haven't actually gotten certified to do so. But
costs money to be certified for organic too.
also
So
costs money to
everything
be
costs
certified.
money.
yes, of course, yeah.
you got to pound these posts in the ground. I decided to do these end posts myself, and I should have, in hindsight, we should have just hired a crew to put these stupid things in the ground.
You should have taken out a credit card and just a cash advance on
We
your
don't
life.
go on vacations anyway. We should have just put it off even further.
I know the feeling.
But you have these thoughts that, okay, I have to do this myself because we just spent $6,000 on a bunch of steel end posts in our vineyard.
Yeah.
So I found this, I went on the internet, of course. I found this tool called the Man Saver.
It's not stupid. It's
By the way, everyone, don't go on the internet to mansaver.com. It's probably not a good website for you to visit. Okay, keep going.
I found this tool, and it is a pneumatic post pounder that you just plug it into an air compressor, and this thing slowly pounds in a end post.
Don't let John fool you with this description. It doesn't do it all for you. You have to get the end post there. You have to get the end post up. You have to get it on the end post.
Yeah.
And hold it in place.
It's a terrible process. These end posts weigh like probably 70 pounds a piece. And they're
And you have how many?
They're 9 feet tall because you put 3 feet in the ground. And you have 180 of them. So I spent the entire winter, every moment that I could, pounding these stupid end posts in the ground.
Yeah.
When if I would have just hired a crew, they would have done it in like 2 days. And I probably would have lived 3 years longer at the end of my life.
Wait, how much do you think it would have cost you to hire a crew to pound the end posts in?
It would have been like $1,000 probably.
No, are you serious?
No, it would have been more. They would have had
Yeah.
to rent a Bobcat or something.
Yeah.
Maybe $2,000. But it would have been totally worth spending $2,000 over destroying my body for 3 months of winter.
I remember John literally in nearly like tears. I mean, making a film is very hard. I want everyone to understand what I'm truly saying. So there's a lot of times I question my own sanity, but I remember John begging, I just want to work on whatever the dumb idea you have,
Yeah.
Jason. You know, just whatever you're going to put me in this cold, weird place around the world, you know, filming some weird thing. And I was like, wow, this is really amazing. And it was just because John was in post hell. You know, this post pounding thing, the imagery of it is astounding. I mean,
You go through moments. It is not easy. So kind of like going back to your full circle of the beginning question of like, why does someone that's wine tasting not want to just start up their own vineyard? It's not easy. It's not, I'm not going to go to someone like, oh, you like wine? You should plant a vineyard.
Terrible idea.
Because it's not easy. You have to want to do it. You have to want the product at the end of it, and you have to be passionate about it.
well, most people, you guys stop me if I'm being evil here. Most people who have a wine label that are not a major company, they don't do this stuff. If you find someone who has a wine label and they say, this is my wine and I make it, and they may technically be a decision maker as a winemaker, but would you say, I mean, what percentage of people actually, I don't mean they stand out in their boots for Instagram. I'm talking about, you know,
Farm it from the ground up.
yeah, and I'm not saying you have to do that.
You don't have to do that, but there are so few people. And we didn't know that going into this. We had no idea. We just assumed like everybody farms their fruit and they make their wines.
And that's not the
It's
case.
just not the case. It's especially difficult as a small producer when you don't have your own winery to make the wines. You have to go to a custom crush facility where you can make the wines under somebody else's roof. In most cases, you're not the one making the wines. You deliver the fruit and they take it and some other winemaker makes the wines and they bottle it for you and you come back in a year or 18 months or whatever and you pick up your wines. And
you
sell
may
them.
taste it along the way and say like, oh yeah, you're doing a
course.
good job
Yeah.
or whatever. Or, you know, it's along with what I wanted it to compare to or something like that.
Of course. And you can be, as much involved in the process as you want to be, but it's just rare that you find people who are growing their own fruit and making their own wines.
And let's be real about this too. It does cost money to make wine. And that doesn't mean wealth upon wealth of money, but it means like John and I both work full-time jobs, and make wine. And then it costs money to have a house with a property. We're aware of that, but it was also, again, very hard earned. Wasn't inherited. There's something to be said that when, having a property to farm from the ground up is not something that falls in your lap every day. We still pinch ourselves that we found something at the time we did, because I'm not sure we could afford it now.
This process of like, here's the beginning, your first vintage. When could I drink a glass of your first wine? I'm not talking about the like carboy of like, you put a few gallons that you harvested last year as the first grapes you got. I'm talking about like your real like, hey, we're going to make more than 150 cases of wine. When can I have the first glass of wine from you guys? I just want to put in perspective of like, John, you speak of 2019. Right now it's 2022. You ordered the vines and you found the place when?
2017.
Yeah,
Okay,
2017.
so this illustrates the fact that you accelerated this as fast as you possibly could. That was 5 years ago. The concept of like, it really, no joke, is 6-7 years. if you do it as fast as you possibly can.
100%. And that doesn't even take into account just the planning and sort of inspirational years. I mean, we started making wines just at home in 2012, just sort of learning the ropes of the process. And we sort of decided in 2015 that we might like to plant a vineyard someday. And it's 2 years of searching for a piece of land, and then 4 years of growing the vines. Once the fruit is picked, year and a half later, then the wine is bottled. So we're looking at our first bottles would be available in probably spring 2024.
Yeah.
So the 2022 vintage.
That illustrates just kind of what we're talking about here, in that, you know, everybody looks at these great European wineries, or, you know, there are some exceptions, especially in Napa, mostly only in Napa, where you have these wineries that are 10 years old and their bottles are selling for a ton of money, which I'm not going to get into or adjudicate at the moment, my thoughts. But you know, for the most part, it takes generations to get to a point where it's like, okay, there's some form of confidence that this is a thing, you know, a real thing, you know, and I'm talking about imposter syndrome. I'm just talking about the fact that it's, you know, several people have thrown their bodies at it, and then it can become a thing that sustains on its own right. Like the vineyard can speak to someone else that knows the tradition, knows what it's growing, knows what it is. When you say you're in this for your entire lives, you know, I think that was important that that's what you said at the beginning of this pod. You didn't say, look, you know, we were thinking about if this works, we'll do it. I mean, so when you talk about pounding posts and being muddy, and I can only imagine you guys were not all smiles with each other the whole time. I mean, there had to be some moments where it was like, holy shit, this is the stuff that I think wine really actually is. It's the actual, like, for the past 3,500 years, it's what it was. Wine is very newly this thing that an NBA player puts on Instagram and you go, holy shit, I like wine because of this. That's not what it was. Never was. It never was supposed to be. And you guys are kind of doing it how it was, you know?
There are things that go into your glass. Your glass is not just there. It is the culmination of an entire year. It's the decisions you made. It's the stress you had. It's the weather. It's the
some luck,
a little bit of luck, and a lot of tears. That is what makes wine magical. You know, I hate bringing it all back to that, but that's what kind of makes wine a little magical, is that every wine's different. And you get that planting your own vineyard. Like, I can see how my wine will be different. And I say that because I'm the mama of the vineyard. Like, those are my grapes.
Yeah. This is a perfect transition to kind of come to a wrap up on the term Wildsound. Why Wildsound? What is Wildsound? Because that's a production term that I know intimately, and you know way more intimately than I do.
Yeah, Wildsound is just it's the sound a place makes when people stop talking. It's like if you're out in the woods by yourself or next to a stream, it's this natural sound that a place makes when there's nobody else there to say anything. I think there's a lot of cool parallels there with winemaking and letting the wines speak for themselves without being messed with too much. It's the stuff of the place without the people there making noise to mess it up, you know?
There's something about what John does for me. I'm a director of films, and John works for and with me. And if you notice the sound design as a viewer in a theater, they've done a bad job. Meaning, John's profession is hidden. It is a secret, right out in the open profession that is supposed to be done perfectly, and it's supposed to be unnoticed. And I think it's really interesting when you bring that back to the concept of winemaking, you taste wine and it should be damn good, and it should be serving the moment you're in. And if, you know, I work, and I assume many of you listening are sommeliers or waiters or wine drinkers or collectors, or you have a reason you're listening to the podcast that's around wine. So you do listen to wine and you think about it differently. But at the same time, if that sound of the wine is too loud, you know, the winemaker is too loud or whatever, it's a lot like what you do, John. You know, if you're watching one of my films, or, you know, John is the person who did every ounce of what you hear, but yet you don't know he's there, but he's tended that sort of thing. And I think it's really interesting as a concept that Wildsound is the name of your vineyard, because the sound engineer is somebody who should be invisible and yet perfect. And I think that that's a very strange analogy to the winemaker. Is that fair?
No, I think there's a lot of cool parallels there, because, you know, with wine, you know, you can really muck it up by manipulating things a lot, but really, ultimately, great wines almost make themselves. If you just get out of the way and let the place do what it's going to do, then the wines will be delicious.
It's great. I recommend to everybody, if you're going to start a vineyard, large or small, you should probably hammer in all the posts yourself. It's a solid decision. You guys, it's a pleasure to have you on. I mean, it's great to talk before you guys have your first real vintage, because I'm sure you have a lot of, hopefully no big trials, but I'm sure you have a few coming.
You'll need some before and after pictures to post up.
Oh, don't you worry. I will share some photos.
That's what'll show it, because the wrinkles on our faces will
no.
certainly show.
You two look fantastic. It's great to have you guys on. I
Thank
appreciate
you, Jason.
it.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
That's fantastic. Everybody listening, I would strongly recommend you go out in your backyard and start your own vineyard if you've listened to this pod. Everybody, if you don't have SOMM TV, go to sommtv.com. It is $49.99 for an entire year. If you want to follow John and Megan's journey, you can go to their Instagram handle. It's at Wildsound Wine. Obviously, we ask you that if you love this podcast, please give us a great review wherever you listen to it. It means a lot. And one last thing, events are starting up. We are about to start what we have all been missing so much, some great food and wine events around our content. We have a lot of films coming out, and so we want all of you, please, to go to our social media accounts, follow, and be ready, because we are about to start doing our premieres in person with wine, so find a babysitter. It's going to be good stuff coming up. All right, everybody, be safe. Thank you.